Welcome to the deep dive. We're going deep today into bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides.
Wow. Yeah, that's a mouthful.
It is, but they're pretty amazing from what I've read.
Oh, they are.
So we're looking at the essay by Jörg-Owe.
Okay.
And he really gets into the nitty-gritty of what these materials can do, like clean energy and dealing with CO2, even cleaning the air.
Yeah, Schneppat's work is really interesting. He doesn't just talk about all the good stuff.
Right.
He also gets into the challenges, which I think is important.
Yeah, I think that makes it more realistic, too.
It does.
So let's back up for a second.
Okay.
What exactly are bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides?
Well, in the simplest terms, think of it like a 3D structure.
Okay.
Like a framework made of atoms, and they're arranged in this very specific way.
Okay.
It's called a perovskite structure, which Schneppat explains in detail.
Got it.
Now, the interesting part is we can put two different metals into this framework.
Oh, wow.
Along with some oxygen and nitrogen. It's like having a molecular Lego set.
I like it.
Where you can just swap out different pieces to create different structures with different properties.
So by changing the metals, scientists can, fine-tune these materials?
So it's like molecular engineering.
That's amazing. Yeah. Schneppat mentions photocatalysis, too.
Right.
How does that work with these materials?
So these materials, they're photocatalysts.
Okay.
Which means they can use light to trigger chemical reactions. Mm-hmm. It's like they capture the energy from light, and then they use it to kind of jumpstart these really powerful chemical transformations.
Wow.
And one of the most exciting things Schneppat talks about is using them to make hydrogen.
Wait, are you saying they could, split water into hydrogen and oxygen using sunlight?
Yeah, that's the potential Schneppat's researching.
That's incredible. Like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, right?
Yeah.
Imagine, in the future, clean energy just from the sun.
That would be amazing.
It's still early, but the possibilities are mind-blowing.
Absolutely mind-blowing. But Schneppat doesn't stop there.
No, he doesn't.
He also talks about using these materials to deal with CO2.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the connection there?
So these bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides, they can actually convert CO2, carbon dioxide.
Right, a major greenhouse gas.
Exactly, into useful chemicals. Schneppat really sees this as a key way to fight climate change.
So we could turn CO2 from a problem into, a resource.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really exciting idea, turning pollution into something we can use.
That's amazing. It sounds like a win-win for everyone.
It does, and that's why it has a lot of researchers excited, including Schneppat.
It sounds incredibly promising. But Schneppat is also realistic about the challenges.
He is.
What are some of the things that need to be figured out before these materials can really make a difference in the world?
Well, one of the big ones is something called charge carrier dynamics.
Okay, that sounds complicated.
It sounds it, but it's basically about how well these materials can use that energy from light to make those chemical reactions happen.
Okay, can you break that down a bit more for us?
Okay, so imagine a really crowded dance floor. You've got these electrons and holes all energized.
Okay.
And they need to, stay separate and keep moving.
Right.
But if they bump into each other too much, they lose energy, the party's over.
I see.
So the challenge, like Schneppat says, is keeping those charge carriers moving so they can do their jobs.
So it's like a delicate balancing act.
It is.
Keeping those particles energized.
Exactly.
But that's just one challenge, right? What else did Schneppat talk about?
Another big one is stability, making sure these materials can last a long time,
Right, they have to be able to function out in the real world.
Exactly. Sunlight, heat, moisture, all that can wear down materials.
Yeah, it's not enough for them to just work in the lab.
Right.
They have to hold up under real-world conditions.
They do. We need them to be durable,
It makes sense. We can't have them falling apart after a few months.
Exactly. So that's a big area of research right now.
It sounds like there's a lot more work to be done.
Oh, definitely. There's a lot to be done.
And Schneppat is really at the forefront of that research.
He is, and he goes into detail about all the different techniques he's using.
Give us a peek behind the scenes.
Sure. So first of all, to really understand these materials, you have to get up close,
Like a molecular detective.
Exactly. That's where Rietveld refinement comes in. It helps analyze the structure of the material.
Interesting.
It's like taking a fingerprint, showing how the atoms are arranged in that perovskite structure.
Okay, so that's one technique.
Yeah, and Schneppat also uses X-ray absorption spectroscopy, or XAS.
Okay, and what does that tell us?
Well, it helps us understand the electronic structure, like how the electrons behave within the material.
It sounds like he's pulling out all the stops to really get a deep understanding.
He is. He wants to get a complete picture.
And that's crucial for addressing those challenges we talked about, right?
Exactly. You need all the pieces of the puzzle.
Right. And Schnepphat is meticulously gathering those pieces.
He is, but it's not just about how they work, it's also about how well they work.
So let's talk performance.
Okay.
How efficient are these bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides at doing what they're supposed to do?
Well, it depends on a lot of factors, actually. Schnepphat explains that the efficiency can vary a lot.
Okay.
Like the crystallinity of the material, you know how well ordered those atoms are?
Right.
That can make a big difference.
It's interesting.
And then things like particle size, surface area, even the specific metals used.
Wow. So it's not just the material itself, it's how it's made and structured.
Exactly. It's a very meticulous process.
That makes sense.
Schnepphat goes into detail about the synthesis methods.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he highlights the challenges of making these materials pure and stable.
That sounds tricky.
It can be, and one thing he mentions that really surprised me was carbonates.
Carbonates?
Yeah, it turns out even tiny amounts of carbonates can have a big impact.
Wow, so even tiny impurities can have a big impact.
They can. It shows how precise you have to be with these materials.
That's fascinating.
It is. And even with a perfectly made material, you still have to worry about those charge carrier dynamics.
Right, those energetic electrons and holes that need to stay separated.
Exactly. And Schnepphat points out that this is a particular challenge for certain systems.
Which ones?
Particulate photocatalytic systems. They're simpler and cheaper to make.
Okay.
But those electrons and holes, they tend to recombine, which can really hurt the efficiency.
So it's a constant battle to keep them doing their job.
It is. And then there's the question of durability, you know, how long they last in the real world.
Right, that's super important.
It is. Schnepphat stresses that, you know, it's not good if these materials degrade quickly.
We need them to be tough.
We do. They have to go the distance.
It sounds like a real balancing act, optimizing performance and durability and all that.
It is, but the potential payoff is huge.
It does sound that way.
Schnepphat's work shows just how many different applications these materials could have.
Yeah, we've talked about hydrogen production and CO2 conversion.
Right, but he also talks about using them to clean the air indoors.
Oh, now that's something I'm interested in.
Right. Everyone wants cleaner air.
Tell me more about that.
Well, these materials can act like powerful little cleaners.
Okay.
Breaking down those nasty pollutants you find in things like paint and cleaning products.
So it's not just masking the smells, it's actually getting rid of the pollutants.
Exactly. Imagine your paint or furniture actually cleaning the air.
Wow, that would be amazing.
It would. It's a really exciting idea.
It's like a built-in air purifier everywhere.
Exactly.
But these materials are so complex, I imagine it'll be a while before we see that.
You're right. Schnepphat acknowledges that. He
Yeah.
says we need more research to optimize these materials and how we make them.
It sounds like a really exciting and dynamic field.
It is. There's so much to explore.
It is. But before we get too carried away with all the possibilities,
Okay.
we need to talk about the environmental impact. It's great to talk about clean energy and clean air, but we need to make sure these materials themselves aren't causing new problems.
That's a really important point.
What does Schnepphat have to say about that?
He addresses it head on.
Good.
He acknowledges that while bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides have huge potential,
Right.
we have to be careful about how we make them and dispose of them.
So it's not just about what they do, it's about how we handle them.
Exactly. We need to be responsible throughout their entire life cycle.
Make sense? What are some of the specific environmental concerns he raises?
Well, one thing he mentions is the potential for heavy metals to leach out.
Oh, right, because these are bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides.
Exactly. They contain metals, and some of those can be toxic.
Right.
So if we're not careful, those metals could end up in the environment.
That would be bad.
It would. They could contaminate water or harm ecosystems.
Are there ways to prevent that?
Schnepphat suggests a few approaches.
Like what?
One is encapsulation, basically putting a protective layer around the material.
Like a little shield.
Exactly, to keep those metals from escaping.
That's clever.
It is. Another approach is to use more environmentally friendly metals in the first place.
So finding metals that do the job without the risk.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Makes sense.
And it's not just the materials themselves. Schneepat also talks about the importance of sustainable production.
Right, so minimizing waste and energy use.
Exactly, and using environmentally friendly chemicals whenever possible.
It's like a chain reaction of sustainability.
It is. Every step of the process needs to be as responsible as possible.
I like that.
It's a good reminder that material science and environmental science are really interconnected.
Absolutely. We can't just focus on creating cool new stuff.
Right, we have to think about the impact on the planet.
It's a powerful reminder that scientific progress and environmental protection have to go hand in hand.
They do. They're not separate things.
Absolutely. And Schneepat doesn't just focus on the potential downsides.
Right.
He also talks about how these materials could help clean up the environment.
He does. We talked about air purification.
Right. But he also mentioned water purification.
He did, and these materials have shown a lot of promise in that area.
How so?
Well, they can break down all sorts of pollutants that you find in water.
Like what?
Things like pesticides, pharmaceuticals, all sorts of contaminants.
Wow, so they could be used to clean up polluted water.
Exactly, and what's really cool is that they can work just using sunlight.
So you could have these passive systems that don't need any extra energy.
Exactly, that's a huge advantage, especially in areas where resources are limited.
That's incredible. It could be a game changer for so many people.
It could, and it's not just about cleaning up existing pollution.
Okay.
Schneepat also suggests that these materials could help prevent pollution in the first place.
How so?
Well, if we incorporate them into industrial processes, we might be able to reduce the amount of waste produced.
So it's a proactive approach to environmental protection.
Exactly. We're not just cleaning up messes, we're preventing them from happening.
I like that. It's a much better way to think about it.
It is, and it shows how versatile these materials are.
They really do seem to have a lot of potential.
They do. Schneepat clearly believes that.
It's inspiring to see that kind of passion.
It is. He sees these materials as more than just a scientific curiosity.
He wants to make a real difference in the world.
He does, and his work shows how powerful materials science can be in addressing these big environmental problems.
Absolutely. But he also stresses that it's not just about the science itself.
Right. What do you mean?
Well, Schneepat talks about the importance of collaboration.
Okay.
He believes that to make real progress in this field, we need researchers from different areas to work together.
That makes sense. You need different perspectives.
Exactly. Chemists, physicists, engineers, environmental scientists, everyone needs to be involved.
It's that kind of collaboration that often leads to the biggest breakthroughs.
It's like a scientific dream team, everyone bringing their expertise to the table.
Exactly. That's how you solve the toughest problems.
And speaking of bringing things together,
Yes.
I think it's time to bring our conversation full circle.
Okay.
We've covered a lot, from the structure of these materials to their applications and environmental impact.
We have.
What are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should walk away with?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides offer a lot of hope for a more sustainable future.
Right. They have the potential to make a real difference.
They do. Their unique structure and properties make them incredibly versatile.
It's like they have a superpower for tackling environmental challenges.
Exactly. They could be used for clean energy, CO2 conversion, air, and water purification.
It's an impressive list.
It is, but as we've discussed, there are still challenges to overcome.
Right. Schneepat doesn't shy away from that.
He doesn't. He's very honest about the hurdles, particularly with performance, stability, and production methods.
It's a reminder that scientific progress is a journey, not a destination.
It is. There will be setbacks and new discoveries along the way.
Absolutely. And Schneepat's work also highlights the importance of collaboration.
It does. We need experts from different fields working together.
It's the only way to solve these complex problems.
It is. We need all hands on deck.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to stay curious, ask questions, and get involved.
Yes, be part of the conversation.
The future of material science and our planet depends on it.
It does. We all have a role to play.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides.
I agree. It's been a great discussion.
It has. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This has been the deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, it's a critical point, and Schneepat doesn't shy away from it.
Right.
He acknowledges that, even though these materials have all this potential, we still have to think about how we produce them and what we do with them when we're done.
So it's not just about what they do, but also how we make them and get rid of them.
Exactly. We need to think about their whole life cycle,
That makes sense.
From where we get the raw materials to how we make them, use them, and eventually dispose of them.
Right. We have to be responsible stewards.
Absolutely. And Schneeppet emphasizes the need for a, what's it called? A life cycle assessment.
Oh,
to make sure we're not creating new problems down the line while trying to solve old ones.
that's a good point. So what are some of the specific concerns Schneeppet brings up?
Well, one thing he mentions is the possibility of heavy metals leaching out.
Oh, right, because these are bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides.
Exactly, and some metals can be toxic.
Right.
So if these materials aren't handled properly, those metals could leak into the environment.
That's not good.
Not good at all. They could contaminate water sources or, harm ecosystems.
Are there ways to prevent that?
Yeah, Schneeppet suggests a couple of things.
Okay.
One is encapsulation, which is basically like wrapping the material in a protective layer.
Kind of like a time relief capsule, but for metals.
Exactly, to prevent leaching.
That's smart.
And another approach is to use metals that are less harmful to the environment.
So finding metals that are both functional and safe.
Right. It's all about finding the right balance.
It's a delicate balance for sure.
It is, and it's not just about the materials themselves.
Right.
Schneeppet also talks about how we make them.
The production process.
Exactly. We need to make that more sustainable, too.
So like using less energy and creating less waste.
Right, and using environmentally friendly chemicals whenever possible.
It's like a chain reaction of sustainability.
It is. Every step has to be as responsible as possible.
I like that. It makes a lot of sense.
It does, and it highlights how connected materials science and environmental science really are.
They're two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. We can't just focus on the science and ignore the impact.
Right. It's a good reminder that scientific progress and environmental protection have to go hand in hand.
They absolutely do. And Schneeppet doesn't just focus on the potential negatives.
He also talks about the positives, right?
Exactly. And he talks about how these materials could help clean up the environment, not just prevent further damage.
He talked about air purification, but he also mentioned water purification, right?
He did. And it's an area where these materials have shown a lot of promise.
Really? How so?
Well, they've been really effective at breaking down different kinds of pollutants you find in water.
Like what kind of pollutants?
Things like pesticides, pharmaceuticals, all sorts of nasty stuff.
Wow. So they could potentially clean up polluted water sources.
That's the idea, and the really exciting part is they can do it using sunlight.
So we wouldn't need any additional energy to power these systems.
Exactly. They could be completely passive, which is a huge advantage in areas with limited resources.
That's incredible. It can make a real difference in those communities.
It could, and it's not just about cleaning up existing pollution.
Okay.
Schneeppet also suggests that these materials could help prevent pollution from happening in the first place.
Oh, interesting how.
Well, imagine incorporating them into industrial processes. We could potentially reduce the amount of harmful waste that's generated in the first place.
So instead of cleaning up the mess afterwards, we stop it from happening in the first place.
Exactly. It's a proactive approach.
I like that. It's a much more sustainable way of thinking.
It is, and it shows how versatile these bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides can be.
It's amazing to think that they could have such a broad impact.
It is, and Schneeppet is clearly passionate about their potential.
You can really tell from his writing he's not just going through the motions.
No, he genuinely believes that these materials can make a real difference in the world.
It's inspiring to see that kind of dedication.
It is, and he's right. Materials science has a huge role to play in addressing these environmental challenges.
Absolutely. But Schneeppet makes another important point, and that's the need for collaboration.
Right, he talks about that a lot.
He says that to make real progress in this field, we need people from different disciplines to work together.
It makes sense. You need different perspectives and expertise to tackle these complex problems.
Exactly. You need chemists, physicists, engineers, environmental scientists, all working together.
It's that synergy, that cross-pollination of ideas that often leads to the biggest breakthroughs.
It's like a scientific dream team, everyone bringing their A game to the table.
Exactly. That's how we'll make the most progress.
And speaking of bringing things together, I think it's time to bring our conversation full circle.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the intricate structure of these materials to their potential applications and environmental impact.
We have. It's been a fascinating discussion.
It has. So what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should walk away with?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides hold a lot of promise for a more sustainable future.
They're like a beacon of hope in a world facing so many environmental challenges.
Exactly. And what makes them so exciting is their versatility.
Right. Their unique structure and properties allow them to be used for a wide range of applications.
Exactly. We talked about clean energy, CO2 conversion, air and water purification, and the list goes on.
It's an impressive range of possibilities.
It is. But as we've discussed, there are still challenges to overcome.
Right. Schnepphat is very upfront about that.
He is. He doesn't sugarcoat the difficulties.
There's still a lot of research and development needed.
There is, especially when it comes to things like performance, stability, and sustainable production.
It's a reminder that scientific progress is an ongoing process.
It is. There's always more to learn and discover.
And Schnepphat's work also highlights the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration.
Absolutely. We need experts from different fields working together if we want to make real progress.
It's about bringing together the best minds to solve the toughest problems.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to stay curious, ask questions, and engage in these important conversations.
Be a part of the solution. Don't just sit on the sidelines.
Exactly. The future of material science, and indeed the future of our planet, depends on our collective willingness to embrace innovation, responsibility, and collaboration.
Well said. It's a call to action for all of us.
And on that note, it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides.
It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
The pleasure was all mine. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's kind of the elephant in the room, isn't it? Schnepphat talks about all the benefits, but doesn't really get into the dollars and cents.
Right, the economic side of things.
Yeah, like, can these materials actually be produced on a large scale?
And at a cost that makes sense.
Exactly. That's a huge question.
It is. We've seen how promising they are in the lab. But scaling up production and making them commercially competitive, that's a whole other challenge.
Absolutely. And that's where, further research comes in.
Right. We need to figure out how to make them efficiently and cost effectively.
Exactly. And we need to do those life cycle assessments.
To understand the true costs, both economic and environmental.
Right. It's not just about making them cheap, it's about making them sustainable too.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sweet spot where innovation, sustainability, and affordability all come together.
Exactly. And that's going to require, new ways of thinking, new approaches to production.
Right. And collaboration. We need researchers, industry, policymakers, everyone working together.
It's a team effort for sure.
It is. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep learning about these materials, ask questions, and get involved in the conversation.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to dig deeper.
The future of material science and our planet depends on it.
It does. We all have a role to play in shaping a more sustainable future.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dives into the world of bimetallic perovskite oxynitrides.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into cutting-edge science.